While I was preparing for a quiet weekend alone, my husband was busy organizing what he called a business trip. His voice sounded tense when he told me, "I'm going on a business trip, so don't even think about calling me for anything." Although his departure was nothing out of the ordinary, this time his attitude was harsher. I tried to assure him that I would only contact him if an emergency arose, but that seemed to bother him even more. In reality, his supposed business trip was no surprise. It was a secret rendezvous with his lover. His threats became increasingly absurd. "If you bother me, I'm going to claim you're causing me emotional distress, understand?" His empathy had completely disappeared, replaced by a cold selfishness and contempt for anyone who wasn't him. He seemed indifferent to our daughter's illness and solely focused on his own desires, always neglecting the needs of our family. I decided to remain silent to protect myself and my children from his growing. The day he left, I heard shocking news. My husband had been in a serious car accident. Despite everything, I remembered his stern warning and chose not to contact him. He had made it clear that his destination was no longer my concern. With my phone off, I allowed myself a small smile. There was a secret he didn't know. A secret that could change everything. My name is Chloe. I'm an art teacher and I'm 27 years old. I create handmade accessories from home. Craftsmanship has been my passion since I was a child. Although I took a break to raise our 3 children, I resumed this work when my youngest son started school, selling my creations online. My husband Hudson is 4 years older than me. We reconnected at a high school reunion, and our connection was immediate, thanks to our love for hands-on work. Hudson works as a visual engineer, a job he takes very seriously, following in his father's footsteps. Hudson's parents, who are 70 years old and quite active, visit us frequently. However, their presence often feels more intrusive than supportive. They've never fully understood the nature of my work from home job and make disparaging comments, saying it's not a real job and doesn't have the same importance as Hudson's career. They also show very little respect for our daughter Ruby's severe seafood allergy. They treat this issue as if it were a mere annoyance, and on one occasion, they nearly endangered her life by offering her seafood. This complicated dynamic with his parents, coupled with some recent actions by Hudson and new information I've discovered, have left me reflecting on the future and well-being of my family. That's why I decided to turn off my phone to enjoy a brief respite from so much turmoil. A worrying event occurred due to a constant misunderstanding about Ruby's allergy. Despite my numerous explanations, it was difficult to make them understand how serious her condition is. Some family members believed it was all psychological and suggested gradually exposing her to cure it. They even went so far as to say, "Nobody really dies from allergies." I felt like I was talking to a wall when trying to ensure Ruby's safety. I never left her alone with Hudson's parents, but they started arriving unexpectedly when I wasn't home, which increased my fear that something bad could happen. Despite all my warnings, Hudson didn't take steps to talk to his parents and prevent their unexpected visits. He often defended them, saying their experience raising children should be enough to trust their judgment. I, exhausted from work and overwhelmed, was left managing the house and children almost alone. Hudson had a limited understanding of Ruby's allergy and often used me as an outlet for his stress. Our son Mason, who doesn't have allergies, became an invaluable support. He read food labels and helped protect Ruby, always looking after his sister. But over time, he started to feel resentment towards Hudson and his parents. One particularly difficult day, Hudson left early for work and later called to ask me to clean his parents' house while his mother was out. Despite having to take care of my own work, when I expressed my annoyance, Hudson minimized it as something trivial and insisted I do it. Reluctantly, I went to his parents' house. While there, I received a call from one of Hudson's coworkers, who informed me that his dad had forgotten some important documents at home. I decided to pick up the documents and take them to Hudson's office. Upon arriving, the coworker, whom I recognized from our wedding, apologized for not contacting Hudson directly. He explained he didn't want to hurt his pride. He greatly appreciated my help, but what he said afterward left me bewildered. The coworker mentioned Hudson had been taking days off to care for our baby, which was a complete surprise to me. Upon further inquiry, I discovered Hudson had been requesting leave from work under the pretext of caring for Ruby. This was completely false. While driving back home, I felt stunned and confused by his deception. Lost in my thoughts, I realized the magnitude of the misunderstanding and misinformation that existed in our family regarding Ruby's health. I also understood that Hudson was avoiding confronting the problem directly. This incident strengthened my resolve to protect Ruby and made me rethink how we communicated and handled responsibilities in our family. That night, when the house was silent and the children were asleep, I sat in front of the TV to relax. Later, Hudson returned home. His arrival, as always, was predictably late. However, this time he was visibly upset and confronted me. "You didn't clean my parents' house today. Mom called to complain," he said, clicking his tongue. I was taken aback. My day had been so chaotic with the unexpected tasks at Hudson's office that I completely forgot to clean his parents' house. But Hudson continued to show his frustration. "You're always at home and you still couldn't do it. What were you doing? Did you go out to clean another place instead of my parents' house?" I tried to explain that I had gone by the house, but I had to take some important documents to his dad's office urgently. However, his expression changed completely. It was a mixture of confusion and an obvious attempt to hide his true feelings. His sudden distance and every one of his movements aroused my suspicion. "Who asked you to go to the office?" he questioned, his voice tinged with fear. While trying to stay calm, I chose not to reveal my discovery. I played along. "I'm not sure, they just asked me to deliver the documents, and then I forgot to clean," I replied, hoping to ease the tension. Hudson, visibly relieved, simply concluded, "Apologize to Mom tomorrow. I'm exhausted. I'm going to bed." Although he seemed calm, his attitude was still cautious. That night, as I tried to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. His behavior and actions were clear signs that Hudson was hiding something significant. After a restless night of contemplation, a grim suspicion began to take shape. Was Hudson being unfaithful to me? Was he using our daughter Ruby's illness as an excuse to hide his infidelity? That was unforgivable. Ruby's severe allergies made her school life quite a challenge. Despite our constant support, Hudson minimized her struggles, even going so far as to say the allergies were psychological. Yet, he used them as an excuse to justify his absences. Filled with anger and doubts I couldn't dispel, I decided to hire a private investigator. It was a difficult financial decision, considering the limited earnings of my online business, but the uncertainty was unbearable. Weeks later, the investigator's report arrived, confirming my worst fears. Hudson was having an affair. He often skipped work to spend time with his lover, a young woman in her 20s with striking features and a confident attitude. Although not entirely unexpected, the revelation left me speechless. The ground beneath our marriage crumbled, and instead of feeling pain, all I felt was rage and repulsion. I decided to continue gathering evidence with the investigator and consulted a lawyer to discuss divorce proceedings. My priorities were clear: securing alimony, child support, and custody arrangements. My thoughts were now focused on a future with my children, far from the past I once shared with Hudson. A few days later, Hudson nonchalantly mentioned he would be working over the weekend on a remote project. He said his presence was necessary for a preliminary inspection and that he would return on Sunday. I knew this was another lie, as his work no longer required that type of travel. Undeterred, my decision was firm, and I was clear about the path I had to follow. 5 months ago, Hudson had switched to a job that no longer required overnight travel, eliminating any work-related excuses for being away from home. However, I suspected he was planning a secret weekend getaway, possibly with someone else. Concerned about possible emergencies while he was away, I mentioned that Ruby wasn't feeling well, and Mason was still recovering from a cold. Furthermore, we wouldn't have the usual support of my parents, as they were traveling. But Hudson, visibly annoyed, insisted I not contact him for trivial matters during his busy work schedule. His defensive attitude only increased my suspicions, giving me the feeling he was hiding something. That night, after he angrily retired to our bedroom, I decided to investigate further. I took his credit card from its usual hiding place, a place where I had found it before. and accessed his account using the same password as always. There I discovered a charge from what appeared to be a luxurious resort located in a remote mountainous region, a destination that didn't match the seaside hotel where his parents were supposed to be. Convinced he was planning to meet his lover, I felt a mixture of anger and betrayal. Determined to take control of the situation, I started looking for apartments for rent online and scheduled 5 viewings for the next weekend. When the weekend finally arrived, Hudson left quietly with his travel bag. After cleaning the house, I prepared to go visit the apartments. I asked Mason, who was resting on the sofa, to look after Ruby while I was out. I planned to talk to them about my plans later when I returned from viewing the properties. I was considering the possibility of a divorce and how to approach it with the children later on. I knew their weak bond with Hudson, who often ignored Ruby's allergies, might make it less impactful for them. On Saturday night I found the perfect apartment, but I decided to leave the final procedures for the following day. Sunday morning, after another visit to the real estate office to sign the lease and complete the paperwork, I felt a mixture of relief and worry. Although the financial strain of paying the private investigator's legal fees, and now a new apartment weighed on me, I considered these expenses as necessary steps towards a new beginning. As I left the office, filled with thoughts of Hudson enjoying his possible illicit getaway, my phone rang. It was Mason. His voice was full of panic as he informed me that Ruby had fainted, and that an ambulance was taking her to the hospital. I could hear sirens in the background, and my hands started shaking as I held the phone. Mason passed the phone to a paramedic, who explained that Ruby was suffering from anaphylactic shock. I was baffled. How could this have happened? I was always meticulous about avoiding any allergens in her food. Overwhelmed by the news, I rushed to my car. However, I was so shocked that I couldn't start the engine. In my desperation, I dialed Hudson's number. This was a genuine emergency, and he should have been available. But Hudson didn't answer. No matter how many times I tried to call him, frustrated and with an effort to remain calm, I stopped trying to contact him and drove directly to the hospital. Upon arriving at the hospital, I saw Mason waiting outside the examination room. "Is Ruby okay, doctor?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Please calm down, Mrs. Brown. Ruby is stable. Her blood pressure dropped, but she is resting peacefully now," the doctor assured me. A wave of relief washed over me, and tears filled my eyes as I understood the gravity of the situation. We had narrowly avoided a tragedy. The doctor praised Mason's quick reaction in calling the ambulance. I was filled with pride for my son, who had acted bravely to protect his sister. While at reception looking for Ruby's insurance card, I noticed that Hudson was still registered as the primary contact. If he was truly out of town, he should have taken the card with him without any problem. This detail made me reflect even more on everything that was happening. I hurried back to the room. While Mason and I were filling out the admission forms, Mason suddenly nudged me and pointed towards the lobby television. The news was showing a single-car accident on a mountain road, the same road that led to the area where Hudson was supposedly going to work. The images were clear. Although the car was badly damaged at the front, the rear was intact, and the license plate was visible. Mason and I recognized it instantly. The report mentioned that Hudson and a female passenger were involved in the accident, but that their injuries were not life-threatening. Realizing that Hudson had been unfaithful was a painful confirmation. Mason, being old enough to understand the situation, remained silent. I felt a deep shame as I realized that I had allowed this situation to go so far, burdening my children with problems that shouldn't be theirs. Just then my phone rang. It was Hudson. I hesitated to answer, remembering his past attitude and his words, "Don't call me for anything trivial." The irony of the situation hit me profoundly, as he was now the one bombarding me with calls. My phone kept ringing, but I decided to ignore the calls. Turning off a cell phone in a hospital wasn't uncommon. After finishing the paperwork, Mason and I returned home only to find Hudson's parents waiting outside. Exhausted by the day's events and in no mood for further confrontations, I braced myself for what was sure to be another challenge. I left Mason in the car and walked toward Chloe, who was visibly agitated. "Where have you been, Chloe? We've been desperately trying to reach you," she questioned, frustrated. "I turned off my phone," I replied calmly. "Hudson had a serious car accident." He's in surgery now and will be hospitalized for a couple of weeks. Her statement didn't surprise me, but I responded with a serenity that infuriated her. Is that so? I said, showing no emotion. My apparent indifference made her lose her patience. How can you be so calm when your husband is in such a serious situation? You don't care in the least. Her words struck a nerve, and I felt a wave of anger begin to rise within me. This confrontation was the last straw in what was already a broken relationship. At that moment I knew I was ready to walk away from everything, and there would be no turning back. It was another emergency. Ruby was rushed to the hospital after a severe allergic reaction that almost cost her her life. I've warned everyone about her allergies many times, but here we are again. I pulled out evidence from my bag and showed it to Hudson's parents, who looked very surprised. Their nervous tick, a quick scratching of the head, betrayed their guilt. I confronted them about their unexpected visit. They had just returned from a trip to a coastal town they used to frequent. They were supposed to spend the night there, but they forgot to book the hotel where they always stayed. All the other places were full, so they returned early and brought rice crackers as a souvenir, giving them to Mason to show to Ruby. Mason told me that he didn't see anything unusual, as Ruby used to enjoy those crackers. But shortly after Ruby ate them, she started to react. And that was in the hospital waiting room. I discovered that the package contained 3 types of crackers, the one she always ate and a new shrimp-flavored version, which wasn't indicated on the box. So I confronted Hudson's parents. You gave Ruby the shrimp crackers on purpose, and then hid the packaging. They minimized everything, saying it was just something in my head. I was furious. Giving someone an allergen knowing it's dangerous is unacceptable. This is ridiculous, they replied, believing they were doing us a favor. I couldn't forgive them for putting Ruby's life at risk. At that moment they tried to change the subject, talking about Hudson's accident. Now's not the time for this. We came to tell you about Hudson's accident. They didn't even care. But I didn't care about anything anymore. Hudson had used our daughter's illness as an excuse to take time off and go on a trip with his lover. I showed them the evidence I had gathered with the help of a private investigator, and they were shocked. I made it clear that my intention was to divorce Hudson, and that I would take legal action against him and his parents for endangering Ruby's life. My patience had run out. It was time to set boundaries and protect Ruby from further harm. As I finished giving my statement, a police car screeched to a halt outside the office. Its sirens cut through the air. Mason had alerted the authorities about our situation. Moments later, the officers arrived at Hudson's parents' house, asking them to accompany them to the station for an investigation into an alleged assault. The news surprised them and they resisted, but they were soon escorted away. A week later, I received a call from an unknown number. It was from the hospital. Despite our estrangement, Hudson had listed me as his emergency contact. Mrs. Brown excused the intrusion, but Mr. Brown insists we contact you, said the voice on the other end of the line, clearly annoyed. To avoid further trouble for the hospital staff, I went to see him. When Hudson saw me, he snapped, "You finally show up, negligent wife. You've been dodging my calls. What has happened since the accident?" he asked. Hudson had been ignoring my attempts at communication. His stay in the hospital conveniently coincided with my final preparations for moving and my consultations with the divorce lawyer. Mason and Ruby fully supported my decision. "I didn't answer because you asked for privacy, Hudson. I assumed you were busy," I replied calmly, feigning ignorance to provoke him further. "And you took my credit card. Today is my discharge day, and I can't pay the hospital bill without it. My insurance card. Pay it at the reception. I didn't bring your insurance card. Maybe ask your parents for help." Ridiculous. How am I going to do that? You're the reason they're incarcerated. These last few weeks have been a nightmare. And I'm considering suing you for emotional distress, Hudson yelled, his voice filling even the isolated room. I had reached my limit. "Actually, Hudson, I'll be the one filing for alimony and child support. Don't act like you don't know. I know exactly what you've been doing, and I have the proof to prove it," I said, showing him the extensive file the private investigator had compiled. As he processed the gravity of the evidence, his composure crumbled. "I've already spoken with the lawyer, and they'll be in touch soon. Mason and Ruby know everything and support the divorce. I can't pay what you're asking. Hudson stammered, clearly frightened. Evidently. You've barely been working, using Ruby as an excuse. Just find the money and solve it, I said firmly, uninterested in his excuses. At that moment, a confident young woman with long black hair entered. Hudson and I were taken aback. You must be Hudson's wife, she said. Well, now that everything is clear, I might as well tell you that I was the one with Hudson on that trip, she declared boldly. During the accident. I remained silent. The woman, whom Hudson referred to as Layla, looked at me with an intensity that mirrored the photos I had seen. I took a deep breath. Thank you for the introduction, I replied, acknowledging that she had been injured in the accident. I commented that she was lucky to have been discharged quickly, since the injuries weren't serious. As we spoke, it came to light that Layla was considering divorcing her husband. Hudson made a decision based on his feelings when he confessed his love and desire to be with her. Layla informed me that although Hudson hadn't yet agreed to the divorce and was worried about the financial burden it might create, she was willing to handle all related expenses, including alimony, to facilitate their separation. She assured Hudson that by choosing her, he wouldn't have to pay any alimony. Not only would it solve his financial problems, but he would also have a younger partner, perhaps more aligned with his aspirations. Hudson initially felt overwhelmed, realizing that Layla's proposal could solve his money problems. The idea of a new life without complications with her seemed appealing. Moved by her offer, he declared her his true soulmate, and they agreed to get married. As they celebrated their decision, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of the situation, knowing full well the complications that awaited him. My private investigator had revealed to me earlier that Layla wasn't just any woman. She was the granddaughter of the leader of a notorious crime family. At that crucial moment, men in black suits entered, confirming her underworld connections. Hudson's face turned serious as he realized what awaited him. If he tried to escape, he could endanger his life. I wished them luck and left, smiling. A month later, thanks to my lawyer, my divorce was finalized. Despite all the drama, Layla kept her promise and paid all the expenses she said she would cover. Hudson, now trapped in a web of debt and family obligations, had no choice but to join the crime family. He was forced to leave his job, and the consequences of his decisions affected his family, who faced public disgrace and isolation. My children and I embraced a new beginning. My small craft business thrived, and my children, especially Ruby, who recovered from her health problems, brought much joy to my life. Meanwhile, we looked forward to celebrating our new beginnings with a special vacation. I remained committed to making others happy through my work, teaching my children the value of empathy and resilience.